They fired the black driver before the flowers on the grave had begun to wilt. For 24 years, Silas Boone had driven the Weatherby family through weddings, business deals, hospital visits, and scandals no newspaper ever discovered. On the morning of Lionel Weatherby's funeral, Silas drove the billionaire's widow and children behind the hearse in a polished black limousine. By sunset, Lionel's eldest son ordered him to surrender the keys and leave the estate. 3 weeks later, an old survey map was unfolded inside a courtroom. Across the center of 8,000 acres appeared a name the Weatherbys had spent half a century hiding: Evelyn Boone, Silas's mother. And according to the original land records, she had never sold them a single acre. The funeral was held at St. Ambrose Cathedral beneath a sky the color of iron. Lionel Weatherby had died at 81 after building Weatherby Resources into an empire of vineyards, timber operations, luxury resorts, and commercial property. Newspapers called him a self-made billionaire, though the family fortune had begun with land inherited from his father. The most valuable part of that inheritance was Briarstone Valley. 8,000 acres of hills, forest, riverfront, and vineyards surrounded the Weatherby estate. The family's mansion stood at the northern end, overlooking fields that produced some of the most expensive wine in the country. Silas knew every road crossing that land. He knew where fog gathered before sunrise, which bridge flooded after heavy rain, and where Lionel liked the limousine to slow so he could inspect the vines without appearing sentimental. That morning, Silas waited beside the cathedral steps while the family entered. He wore a dark chauffeur's uniform, black gloves, and the silver tie pin Lionel had given him after 20 years of service. Lionel's eldest son, Pierce Weatherby, barely looked at him. Pierce was 53, tall, silver-haired, and already acting like the new head of the family. He had served as chief executive of Weatherby Resources for 6 years, though Lionel retained final authority until his death. Pierce's younger sister, Helena Weatherby Shaw, followed him into the cathedral with her husband and 2 daughters. Their younger brother Miles arrived late and smelled faintly of alcohol. The widow, Constance Weatherby, was the last to leave the limousine. At 76, she remained elegant even beneath a black veil. She placed one hand on Silas's arm before climbing the steps. "Lionel trusted you," she said quietly. Silas did not know why she chose that moment to say it. "I respected him." Her fingers tightened slightly. "That is not the same thing." "No, ma'am." Constance looked as though she wanted to say more. Pierce called from the entrance, "Mother." She released Silas and walked inside. The cathedral filled with executives, politicians, landowners, and charity directors. A former governor delivered a speech praising Lionel's loyalty to family and community. No one mentioned the farm workers displaced when Weatherby Resources expanded its vineyards. No one mentioned the small homes demolished for the family's private resort. No one mentioned Evelyn Boone. Silas stood near the rear doors with the household staff. His mother had died 14 years earlier. She spent most of her life in a narrow wooden house near the southern boundary of Briarstone Valley. As a boy, Silas believed the house belonged to the Weatherbys. His mother called it the last piece they could not take. Whenever he asked what she meant, she changed the subject. Evelyn worked as a cook at the Weatherby estate for 37 years. She left before sunrise and returned after dark, carrying food the kitchen would otherwise discard. Silas remembered one argument between her and Lionel's father, Harrison Weatherby. Harrison came to their house accompanied by 2 men in suits. Silas was 11. Evelyn stood in the doorway holding a folded paper against her chest. "You already took the North Field," she said. "You are not taking this house." Harrison replied that everything in the valley belonged to his family. Evelyn said, "Your family knows better." The men left without entering. Years later, Harrison's company constructed a fence around the property but left a narrow road connecting Evelyn's house to the public highway. Silas assumed she had won a small boundary dispute. He never imagined the dispute concerned the entire valley. After the funeral, the family returned to Briarstone Hall for a private reception. Silas drove Constance and Pierce in silence. The limousine passed rows of vines and entered the estate through iron gates bearing a gold W. Pierce spent most of the journey answering business calls. He ended the final one as they approached the mansion. "Stop near the service entrance." Silas glanced at him through the mirror. "Mrs. Weatherby usually enters through the main portico." "She will today." Pierce looked toward his mother. "You go inside. I need to speak with Silas." Constance turned. "Now." "It concerns staffing." Her expression changed. "Not today." "It should have been handled before today." Silas pulled beneath the main portico. A footman opened Constance's door. She remained seated. "Pierce, your father has been buried for less than 2 hours. And the company continues operating." "Silas is not a company problem." Pierce looked at him through the mirror. "No, he is a household expense." Silas kept his hands on the steering wheel. Constance stepped out slowly. Before entering the mansion, she looked back at him. There was warning in her eyes. Pierce directed Silas to the garage. The estate garage held 12 vehicles, from vintage touring cars to armored SUVs. Silas parked the limousine in its usual space and began recording the mileage. Pierce stood behind him. "You can leave that. I complete the log after every journey. You will not be driving another." Silas closed the book. "What happened?" "My father's personal transportation arrangement ended with his death. I also drive Mrs. Weatherby. My mother will use the security team." "Did she request that?" "This is not a negotiation." Silas removed his gloves. "Then why wait until after I drove the funeral?" "Because we needed someone familiar with the route." The honesty was almost more insulting than a lie. "You kept me long enough to bury him." "I kept you until your services were no longer required." Silas looked at the rows of cars he had maintained for decades. "Mr. Weatherby gave me no notice. My father made many informal promises to employees. He told me my position would continue as long as your mother needed me." Pierce's mouth tightened. "Do you have that in writing?" "No." "Then it was not an agreement." Silas reached into the limousine and removed the silver tie pin. He placed it on the vehicle log. Pierce glanced at it. "That was a gift. I no longer want it." "You are being emotional." "I drove your father while he was dying. I brought your mother to the hospital every night. I carried your brother out of bars so photographers would not see him. I taught both your daughters to change a tire because you said roadside work was beneath them." Silas's voice remained steady. "You waited until after the funeral because you knew your father would have stopped you before it." Pierce stepped closer. "My father became overly attached to certain staff members. Your father understood loyalty when it was useful. You were compensated." "Yes." "Then do not confuse employment with family." "I never did." The answer unsettled Pierce. He had expected Silas to beg for recognition. Instead, Silas opened the small cabinet where the drivers kept keys and documents. He removed his personal notebook and an old photograph of Evelyn standing beside a black sedan. Pierce looked at the photograph. "Your mother worked here too." "She did." "Our family employed yours for 2 generations. You have been treated well." Silas turned toward him. "Compared with what?" Pierce did not answer. He extended one hand. "Keys." Silas removed the estate ring from his belt and placed it in Pierce's palm. Among them was a small brass key with no label. Pierce examined it. "What does this open?" "Your father's map cabinet." Pierce looked up. "Why did you have access?" "Because he often asked me to bring survey records during drives." "What survey records?" "Old vineyard boundaries, logging roads, river easements." Pierce closed his fist around the keys. "You will leave the property within the hour." "My belongings are in the driver's cottage. Security will pack them." "No." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "No?" "I have lived there for 24 years. I will pack my own possessions." "The cottage belongs to the estate." "I did not say otherwise." For the first time, Silas saw something beneath Pierce's confidence, nervousness, not about the cottage, about the brass key. Silas returned to the small house behind the garage. His wife had died 5 years earlier. Their daughter lived in another state, so the cottage contained only Silas's clothing, books, tools, and boxes inherited from Evelyn. Security Chief Nolan Price arrived while Silas packed. Nolan had known him for 15 years. "I'm sorry," he said. "Did you know?" "Since yesterday." "You could have warned me." Pierce ordered everyone silent. Silas folded a coat. "And you listened." "I have a mortgage and 2 children." "So did my mother." Nolan looked away. Silas did not blame him completely. That was how estates like Briarstone survived. Every employee knew what silence purchased and what honesty could cost. At the bottom of a wardrobe, Silas found a long cylindrical case wrapped in faded canvas. It had belonged to Evelyn. He had seen it many times but never opened it. His mother called it old church paper and asked him not to discard it. He placed it with the other boxes. Nolan offered to arrange a company vehicle. Silas refused. He loaded what he could into his own aging sedan. The remaining furniture would be collected later. As he drove from the estate, rain began striking the windshield. At the iron gates, Constance stood beneath an umbrella. Silas stopped. She approached the driver's window. "I told him not to do this." "You could have stopped him." Her face tightened. "I no longer control the company." "This was not a company decision." "No." "Then you could have stopped him." She lowered the umbrella slightly. "You sound like your mother." Silas looked at her. "You knew her." "Of course I knew her." "That is not what I meant." Constance glanced toward the guardhouse. "Lionel kept papers." "What papers?" "In his study, an old map." Pierce's concern about the brass key returned to Silas's mind. "What map?" She spoke quickly. "Your mother once told Lionel the valley had been measured incorrectly. He said she was confused." "Was she?" "No." A security vehicle approached from the mansion. Constance stepped back. "Find the original survey before Pierce does." Silas opened the door. "Constance." She walked away without turning. The security vehicle stopped beside her and drove her back toward the house. Silas remained at the gates until they disappeared. Then he left Briarstone Valley. He spent the first night at his daughter Renee's apartment. Renee Boone was 32 and worked as a public school counselor. She listened without interrupting while Silas described the dismissal and Constance's warning. "What was Grandma involved in?" she asked. "I don't know." "You never asked about the papers." "She did not like discussing the Weatherbys." "Yet you worked for them your entire adult life." "Your grandmother needed medical care. Lionel offered stable work and health insurance." Renee looked at him carefully. "Did she want you to take the job?" "No." "Why did you?" "Because anger did not pay for her treatment." The sentence sounded harsher aloud. Silas brought the canvas tube to the kitchen table. The leather straps had hardened with age. He opened them carefully. Inside were 3 rolled documents. The first was a hand-drawn map of Briarstone Valley dated 1958. The second was a deed. The third was a letter addressed to Evelyn Boone. Silas unfolded the map. Time had turned the paper yellow, but the ink remained clear. Rivers, ridges, roads, and field boundaries crossed the sheet in precise lines. At the bottom appeared the name of surveyor Nathaniel Crow. A red boundary surrounded nearly the entire valley. Inside it, written in dark ink, were the words, "Property of Evelyn May Boone." Renee leaned closer. "This says Grandma owned Briarstone." "That is impossible." "Why?" "The Weatherbys had the estate before she worked there." "Maybe they had the mansion." Silas unrolled the deed. It was dated April 4th, 1959. The grantor was Eliza Mercer Boone, Evelyn's grandmother. The grantee was Evelyn May Boone. The deed conveyed 8,140 acres known as Briarstone Valley, excluding only a 120-acre estate parcel containing the Weatherby mansion. Silas read it twice. The Weatherbys had owned the mansion and its immediate grounds. Evelyn's family had owned almost everything surrounding it. The letter explained part of the history. Eliza wrote that the Boone family's title originated after the Civil War, when a former plantation owner transferred the valley to several formerly enslaved families as settlement for unpaid labor. Over the decades, other families sold their interests. The Boones retained the largest portion. By the 1950s, Evelyn became the sole surviving descendant named in the consolidated title. The letter warned her about Harrison Weatherby. He will say the map is mistaken because his business depends upon people believing the Hilltop House owns everything visible beneath it. Do not sign any release without independent counsel. Renee looked at her father. Did Grandma sign something? I don't know. Did you inherit the land? Not if she sold it. But the Weatherbys may have hidden that. Silas called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Imogen Clark, a property rights lawyer known for handling heirs' land and fraudulent title transfers. She examined the deed, map, and letter under bright archival lamps. The documents appear authentic, she said, but we need the recorded chain of title. Silas sat opposite her. The county records show Weatherby ownership. Since when? I don't know. That is where the story will be. Imogen searched digital records. The modern title listed Weatherby Resources and several family trusts as owners of the valley. The earliest scanned record dated to 1974. Before that, the system referred to books stored in the county archive. They visited the archive together. The deed volumes had been moved to a basement after a courthouse renovation. Several books showed water damage. The index listed the Boone deed from 1959, but the corresponding page had been cut from the volume, not torn, cut cleanly with a blade. The archivist Thomas Wren examined the binding. This page was removed decades ago. Can you prove what was on it? Imogen asked. The index establishes a recording. Microfilm may exist. The county began filming property books in the early 1960s. The 1959 volume had been filmed retroactively in 1968. Thomas retrieved the reel. The missing deed appeared clearly. Evelyn May Boone had owned Briarstone Valley. The next relevant document was a mortgage recorded in 1962. Evelyn borrowed $40,000 from Weatherby Agricultural Bank, a lender controlled by Harrison Weatherby. The loan was secured against 600 acres near the Southern River, not the entire valley. 2 years later, a foreclosure deed transferred all 8,140 acres to Harrison Weatherby after Evelyn supposedly failed to repay. Imogen studied the document. They foreclosed on more land than the mortgage covered. Silas read the signature. It claimed Evelyn had acknowledged that the entire valley served as collateral. That is not my mother's signature. You are certain? She wrote with her left hand after an accident. Her letters leaned backward. This one leans forward. The document was notarized by Curtis Weatherby, Harrison's brother. The foreclosure sale was conducted by the same bank that held the mortgage. Harrison purchased the property for less than the original loan amount. Renee stared at the figures. He lent her money against 600 acres, claimed all 8,000 as collateral, and sold it to himself. That appears to be the allegation, Imogen said. Why did she borrow the money? Silas remembered the period vaguely. Evelyn's younger brother had suffered a serious workplace injury. Medical bills overwhelmed the family. She also repaired storm damage on several tenant houses in the valley. The loan was not reckless. It was survival. Bank ledgers showed Evelyn made regular payments for 18 months. Then the payments stopped appearing. Yet her personal records contained canceled checks covering another year. The bank had received the money. It had not credited the loan. Imogen requested records from the successor institution that acquired Weatherby Agricultural Bank. Most had been destroyed under retention policies, but tax filings remained. The bank reported Evelyn's loan as performing months after the date it claimed she defaulted. This foreclosure was fraudulent, Imogen said. Silas looked at the map. Why did my mother remain in that small house if she knew? Did she challenge it? The county court index showed a lawsuit filed by Evelyn Boone against Harrison Weatherby in 1965. The case record was missing. Its dismissal entry stated that Evelyn voluntarily withdrew the action. Silas knew she would not have withdrawn without reason. Imogen found the attorney who represented her. His name was Julian North. He had died years earlier, but his daughter maintained boxes from his old practice. Inside one was the Boone file. The papers revealed what happened. Julian filed suit to void the foreclosure. He had the original mortgage, canceled checks, and testimony from a bank clerk who admitted Harrison ordered payments moved into a separate account. 2 weeks before trial, the clerk disappeared. Then Evelyn's house caught fire. Silas remembered the fire. He had been 9. His mother pulled him through a bedroom window while smoke filled the hallway. The fire department called it an electrical accident. Julian's notes called it intimidation. After the fire, Harrison offered Evelyn an agreement. He would pay her brother's medical care, rebuild the house, and allow the family to remain there permanently. In exchange, she would dismiss the lawsuit. She refused. 3 days later, child welfare officers arrived and threatened to remove Silas, claiming the burned home was unsafe and Evelyn lacked sufficient income. Evelyn signed the dismissal, not because she accepted the foreclosure, because Harrison had turned her son into leverage. Silas read Julian's handwritten note. Mrs. Boone states she cannot risk losing Silas. She insists she is not surrendering title and asks that all evidence be preserved until he is old enough to understand. Silas stopped reading. Renee placed one hand over his. She gave it up for you. No, she delayed the fight for me. Julian preserved the mortgage file but never reopened the case. Evelyn could not afford continued litigation. Harrison controlled the bank, local employers, and much of the county government. She continued working in his house because the settlement required employment and housing. The arrangement allowed the Weatherbys to describe her as a grateful employee living on family land. In reality, she cooked their meals while they profited from acreage stolen from her. Silas felt physically ill. I drove them across her land for 24 years. You did not know, Renee said. She tried to warn me. She also tried to protect you. That protection became my ignorance. Imogen continued investigating. The old map in Evelyn's tube was not merely a private drawing. It matched a federal agricultural survey conducted before the fraudulent foreclosure. Original survey markers still existed across the valley. Some had been covered by Weatherby construction. One marker stood beneath the fountain in front of Briarstone Hall. Another lay inside the vineyard's oldest storage building. The map cabinet in Lionel's study likely contained related records, but Silas no longer had access. Imogen filed a notice of adverse title claim and requested an emergency preservation order preventing the destruction or transfer of land records. Pierce responded immediately. Weatherby Resources called the Boone documents fabricated and the claim an attempt by a disgruntled former employee to exploit the family after Lionel's death. A company spokesperson emphasized that Silas had been dismissed days before asserting ownership. They did not mention Constance's warning. Pierce appeared on television. My family has maintained and developed Briarstone Valley for generations. Mr. Boone was treated with respect and generosity throughout his employment. It is unfortunate that grief and resentment have led to this attack. Silas watched from Imogen's office. He says they treated me generously. Powerful families like that word, she said. It makes wages sound like gifts. The court granted limited preservation but did not immediately stop Weatherby operations. Pierce ordered the family archive reviewed. The old map cabinet was empty. He claimed Lionel removed its contents before his death. Constance requested a private meeting with Silas. They met in a church office away from the estate. She brought a small leather notebook. Lionel gave me this 6 months ago, she said. It was his personal diary. He knew about the foreclosure. He discovered the original map after his father died. When? 32 years ago. Silas stared at her. Before he hired me. Yes. The betrayal deepened. Lionel knew Silas was the son of the woman from whom the valley had been taken. He hired him anyway, perhaps because of guilt, perhaps to keep him close. Why didn't he return the land? Constance looked exhausted. He said the company had borrowed against it. Vineyards, timber contracts, resort financing, everything depended on clear title. The title was not clear. He told himself correcting it would destroy thousands of jobs. That is what rich men call theft when enough people profit from it. Constance accepted the words. I said something similar. Yet you stayed. Yes. Why? Fear, children, comfort, cowardice. Choose the word that satisfies you. None will. She handed him the diary. Lionel's entries documented years of concealment. He hired surveyors to compare Evelyn's map with company boundaries. They confirmed it. He asked attorneys whether the foreclosure could be challenged. They warned that the Boone heirs could reclaim the land and decades of profits. Lionel considered a private settlement. Pierce discovered the discussion and opposed it. According to the diary, Pierce argued that Silas had no knowledge of the title and Evelyn was unlikely to sue before her death. One entry read, Pierce says silence has become ownership. I told him silence is not consent. He answered that courts often treat it that way. Silas closed the notebook. He knew my mother was alive. Yes. Did he ever speak to her? Once. She refused money. What did she ask for? The deed corrected and the tenant families protected. And Lionel said? That he needed time. Silas laughed without humor. Time is what men ask for when someone else is paying the cost. Constance looked down. The week before he died, Lionel told Miriam Halstead to prepare a land trust returning part of Briarstone to you and other descendants. Part? He still could not face the whole truth. What happened to the papers? Pierce removed them after the funeral. Silas understood why he had been fired so quickly. Pierce was not simply reducing household expenses. He wanted the one person connected to Evelyn removed before Lionel's records surfaced. Where is the original map cabinet material? Constance hesitated. Lionel hid it inside the old carriage house. The building stood near the abandoned Western Road. It had been locked for years. The preservation order allowed court officials to inspect it. Pierce objected, claiming the carriage house contained dangerous structural damage. The judge authorized entry with engineers present. Behind a false wall, investigators found 12 archive boxes. Inside were original surveys, correspondence, bank records, photographs, and Lionel's unfinished restitution plan. They also found a recorded conversation between Lionel and Pierce. Lionel's voice was weak. The Boone title is legitimate, Pierce answered. Legitimacy is irrelevant after 60 years of development. It will not be irrelevant to Silas. Then he should never know. He deserves the truth. He is a driver. He is Evelyn's heir. He has spent his life accepting a salary from us. That will weaken any claim. You mean his labor will be used as evidence that he agreed to his mother's theft? I mean, courts prefer stability. Lionel replied, Stability for whom? The recording ended. Pierce's public argument collapsed. He changed strategy. The family admitted irregularities in the historical foreclosure but argued that statutes of limitation, adverse possession, and later investment prevented recovery. Imogen argued that the Weatherbys had concealed fraud continuously, removed records, and deliberately kept Evelyn and Silas from discovering the claim. The title had never been peacefully adverse. Evelyn challenged it. She withdrew under coercion. Lionel later recognized the Boone ownership privately. Pierce actively concealed the evidence after Lionel's death. Other descendants came forward. The original valley deed had belonged to Evelyn, but tenant families held long-term occupancy and farming rights recorded in older agreements. Weatherby operations had evicted many of them during vineyard expansion. The lawsuit grew. Former residents described homes demolished, cemeteries fenced off, and crops destroyed after the Weatherbys declared them trespassers. An elderly woman named Marjorie Ellis testified that her father paid rent directly to Evelyn before the foreclosure. Who collected it afterward? Imogen asked. Harrison Weatherby. Did he explain that ownership had changed? He said Miss Evelyn had failed to manage the land. Did you believe him? No, but belief did not stop the bulldozers. The original bank clerk was eventually located through her grandchildren. Her name was Clara Bell. She had not disappeared voluntarily. Harrison paid her to leave the state after she objected to altering Evelyn's loan record. Before leaving, Clara wrote a sworn statement and mailed it to Julian North. It remained sealed in his file. The statement described Harrison directing staff to move Evelyn's payments into a suspense account so the mortgage would appear delinquent. He then expanded the collateral description from 600 acres to the full valley. Curtis Weatherby notarized the altered document without Evelyn present. The evidence was overwhelming, yet the legal remedy remained difficult. Briarstone Valley now contained businesses, employee housing, public roads, conservation areas, and privately sold parcels. Returning every acre directly was impossible without harming people uninvolved in the original fraud. Silas did not want thousands of workers displaced. Pierce used that concern against him. During a press conference, he said, Mr. Boone claims moral ownership but has offered no practical plan for the families and employees who depend on the valley today. Silas responded publicly for the first time. He stood outside the county courthouse beside Renee, Imogen, and descendants of the displaced families. The Weatherbys relied on practical concerns when they stole the land, when they hid the map, and when they continued profiting after learning the truth, he said. Practicality cannot mean the victims must always surrender because the theft became profitable. A reporter asked whether he wanted the mansion. No. The vineyards? I want the title corrected before we discuss use. Would you remove Weatherby resources? I spent my life driving people safely across that valley. I am not interested in throwing workers from it, but employment cannot be used as a shield around stolen property. The trial began 14 months after Lionel's funeral. Pierce sat with a team of corporate attorneys. Silas sat beside Imogen with Evelyn's map spread carefully inside a protective case. The map became the center of the case. Survey experts compared its landmarks with modern satellite data and surviving boundary stones. Every major line matched. A specialist examined the paper and ink, both dated to the 1950s. Nathaniel Crow's descendants provided his survey journal, which confirmed Evelyn commissioned the work after Harrison began claiming control over northern fields. The journal contained one revealing entry. Mrs. Boone fears Weatherby intends to make the mansion's view into his boundary. She says wealthy men often mistake what they can see for what they own. Pierce's attorney questioned Silas. You worked for the Weatherby family for 24 years? Yes. You lived in estate housing? Yes. You received wages, insurance, and retirement contributions? Yes. Did you ever tell Lionel Weatherby you owned Briarstone Valley? I did not know. Did your mother? She knew she did. Yet she worked for the family. After her house burned and they threatened to take her child. The attorney paused. Do you have proof the Weatherbys caused the fire? No. So that is speculation. The coercion is recorded in her lawyer's notes. Notes are not proof of arson. I said they used the fire and the condition of the house to threaten her. I did not say we proved who lit it. The attorney changed direction. Your mother accepted rebuilt housing and employment. She accepted survival. Is that your interpretation? It is what her attorney recorded. She dismissed her lawsuit. Under threat of losing me. She signed voluntarily. Silas looked toward Pierce. People sign many things when someone powerful controls what happens to their children. The attorney displayed a photograph of Silas driving Lionel. You had a close relationship with Mr. Weatherby. I worked closely with him. He trusted you. Sometimes. Did you respect him? Sometimes. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Did he ever mistreat you? He knew my mother's title and allowed me to spend 24 years serving the family that benefited from its theft. That is not responsive. It is the most responsive answer I have. Lionel's diary and recording were admitted. Pierce's voice filled the courtroom. He should never know. Jurors looked toward him. He kept his eyes on the table. Constance testified against her son. Pierce's attorneys tried to portray her as grieving and confused. She remained precise. Did Lionel believe the Boone claim was legitimate? Imogen asked. Yes. Did Pierce know? Yes. Why was Silas fired after the funeral? Pierce said employees loyal to Lionel needed to be removed before they interfered with restructuring. Did he mention the land records? He asked whether Silas knew where Lionel kept the old surveys. Pierce looked up sharply. What did you tell him? That I did not know. Was that true? No. The courtroom became silent. Why did you lie to your son? Because I had spent too many years helping one generation of Weatherby men hide the truth, I did not intend to help another. The judge's ruling came 4 months later. The original foreclosure was declared fraudulent and void. The Weatherby family's title to the majority of Briarstone Valley was invalid. Evelyn Boone had remained the legal owner until her death. Silas, as her only child, inherited her ownership interest, but the court created a structured remedy rather than immediate eviction. The valley was transferred into the Briarstone Community Land Trust. Silas held the principal inherited interest but agreed that the trust would include representatives of displaced families, current workers, conservation groups, and local government. Existing homes and lawful employee housing were protected. Weatherby Resources could continue operating vineyards and resorts only through long-term leases negotiated with the trust. A significant portion of profits would fund housing restoration, environmental repair, and compensation for families driven from the land. Several undeveloped parcels were returned directly to descendants. Historic cemeteries and public roads were reopened. The mansion's original 120-acre parcel remained with the Weatherby family because their title to it was legitimate. They could keep the house. They no longer owned the view. Pierce was removed as chief executive after the company board discovered he had concealed material title risks from lenders and investors. He also faced criminal investigation for destroying records and interfering with the preservation order. Weatherby Resources survived under new management. Its first lease payment went to the community trust rather than a family holding company. Constance moved from Briarstone Hall to the smaller coastal house Lionel left her. Helena joined the trust's Historical Reconciliation Committee, though many descendants distrusted her motives. Miles sold his company shares and disappeared from public life. Silas received offers to become trust president. He declined the title at first. I am a driver, he told Imogen. You are also the legal owner whose decisions created the trust. I have never managed thousands of acres. Neither had Pierce. That did not stop him. Renee laughed. Silas eventually accepted the role of land steward, working beside professional managers, farmers, historians, and community representatives. He did not move into Briarstone Hall. He restored Evelyn's wooden house. The Weatherbys had maintained its exterior but removed much of the original interior over the years. Silas returned the kitchen table, repaired the porch, and framed his mother's deed above the fireplace. The old map was displayed in a public archive built inside a former vineyard warehouse. Visitors could see Evelyn's name across the valley. Beside it was the altered mortgage and the fraudulent foreclosure deed. Nothing was hidden. The archive explained how land theft could occur without armed strangers arriving in the night. It could happen through a mislabeled payment, a changed collateral description, a missing page in a record book, a frightened mother signing a dismissal to keep her child, a family waiting until profit made restoration seem inconvenient. 1 year after the judgment, the Briarstone Trust held a public gathering near the river. Former residents returned. Current vineyard workers attended with their families. A stone marker was placed where the old Boone boundary met the public road. It carried no grand family crest. Only the names of the families whose ownership and residence had been erased from the official history. Evelyn Boone's name appeared first. Silas stood beside the marker holding the brass key from Lionel's map cabinet. Pierce had returned it through his attorney after the trial. Renee asked what he planned to do with it. Silas looked toward the mansion on the distant hill. For most of my life, this opened a cabinet filled with truths I was not allowed to see. Are you keeping it? No. He placed it inside the archive beside Lionel's diary. The door is open now. Months later, Silas received a letter from Pierce. It contained no apology. Pierce argued that the judgment destroyed the legacy his father built and claimed Silas had allowed resentment to dismantle a functioning enterprise. Silas wrote one sentence in reply: "An enterprise is not functioning properly when its foundation requires the owner's name to remain hidden." He did not send anything else. The vineyards continued producing wine. The resorts remained open. The forests were protected from a logging expansion Pierce had planned. Workers received seats on management committees. Families who had once been described as trespassers returned to cemeteries where their grandparents were buried. The valley did not collapse when the truth was recognized. Only the Weatherby's absolute control did. Years later, a student visiting the archive asked Silas why Evelyn never told him everything. He looked at the map. She tried in the way she could. But she kept the deed hidden. She kept it safe. Why didn't she fight after you grew up? Silas considered the question. She was tired, she was sick, and she may have believed working near the records gave her a better chance of protecting them than being removed from the valley entirely. Was she angry that you became their driver? Yes.